Susan, just to say that the link wasn't working, so people are going to be a little late. Hello, everybody. I'm just checking on the dates and everybody coming in. So it's lovely to see so many people logging in. My name is Hazel Baker and I run London Guided Walks. And it's an absolute pleasure to welcome both you and also Susan Baker, no relation, I'd like to add. To her first virtual tour with London Guided Walk. So welcome, Susan.
Hello, Hazel. Good to see you.
All righty. So we've worked really closely on this walk to try and deliver the best virtual experience for everybody, haven't we, Susan?
We have. We had a good day out filming in up on Regent's Canal. So it was really, really great day. Better than today. Much better than today.
I took my laundry down whilst it was snowing this afternoon. It was a bit bizarre in the sunshine, so it was very, very bizarre. So just if everybody hasn't been on a tour before, a virtual tour with us, then just to let you know, so hello to Lisa and Andy. Hello. Welcome back, Claire and Gordon, Ian, Jane and Trevor, Keith and Andrea. That's your first one. I know that one. Richard, Dean, Jean and Linda and Tim. So I'm sure there are some more, but these are the ones that I managed to scribble down just as we were going live. So it's lovely to not see you all. I hope you've all got a little bit of a drink ready and looking forward to doing that. Now, please do let us know where you are from. So this is a totally bespoke live tour. I want as much interaction as possible, which means that you can send me a text or a WhatsApp in the number below. You can see a little bubble right there, and then say hello, give it a shout out. Maybe it's someone's birthday or it's a special occasion, or you just want to say hello. Let us know where you're from as well, because we've had some really people booking off from far off distances, and it's always nice to know where you are all from. So we have a tour of two halves, haven't we, today, Susan?
Yes, we're going to first of all have the recorded walk, which people can actually walk themselves, get it on an app, and do the walk yourself on a nice day. And then at the end, we're going to have some extra bits, telling you some more. And then if there are any questions, I'll attempt to answer them as well.
Lovely. So if you have any questions, all right, I'm just messaging. Claire is just saying that she can't get on, so let me just send her that link. But if Susan, you're able to share a little bit about the day of the actual recording, because this is something that we've not done before.
Yes, well, it was actually during lockdown. It was only a couple of weeks ago. Glorious sunny day, and what we've done is make it as if you were there on the walk with me. So Hazel was filming me at each stop, and we'd get the talk telling you about what you could see, what the history of the place that we were stopping at, and then we'd be filming a bit walking along the canal. It was actually a very busy day. I think the sun had brought everybody out, so it was busy walking along this stretch of the canal. And then we'd stop, we'd do some more filming, and to try and make it seem as much as possible as if you were actually doing the walk, even though you may not be today. Obviously, you're not walking it, you're not there in person, but to try and give you an idea of what to expect. Either if you actually come along and buy the app, buy the self-guided tour and do it on the app, or else if you come along on an actual physical walk later on with us and enjoy it in person.
Lovely. I've got confirmation that Claire has joined us now. Fantastic, Claire. I think you've been on every of our virtual tours, which is wonderful. And Gordon, you are from Greenwich, so we're neighbours, Gordon, because I'm in Greenwich as well. And you're South London, aren't you? So sorry about the frustration. I suggest you start 2-3 minutes earlier, so early birds aren't frustrated. We were live earlier. It was my link on my website that wasn't working. That is my fault entirely. So I'm very sorry, Gordon, for that and any inconvenience caused to all of you. But we haven't started without you all. You are all here now. So mentioned any questions or any shout outs that you want, then this is the number that you need to contact us on. We're going to drop out now as we show you the video. Susan explained, after the video she will then give you a live tour on certain areas that we, when we're on a tour, we've only got a certain amount of time that we can really give you, but there's lots of posters and pictures that we wanted to share as well, so we found that this is the best way, and that means that you're able to add in a few questions as well. So we'll butt out then, Susan, and I'll
just one thing.
Yeah, go for it.
Just one thing. This bit of the Regent's Canal is possibly one which people don't know. Lots of people may know the part from, say, Paddington, particularly past the London Zoo and Camden Market, but it isn't going through that part. It's going through a part which is actually really been developed over the last 20 years and how it's changed. So hopefully it's an area that you don't know, and we'll show you some new things.
Yes. Right. Okay. So let's just do this. So we'll butt out then, Susan, and we'll take the mini Susan and can take over.
Welcome to Islington on this lovely sunny day. We're going to go on a walk along the canal from Islington to Hackney, to a place called Broadway Market. and we'll see how over the last 200 years the canal and its buildings around it have changed radically from being a commercial, dirty place where you wouldn't have wanted to go to now being a lovely, open area with lots of beautiful apartments and coffee shops and bars where people are just anxious to live these days. Before we set off, I just want to talk to you a little bit about Islington, because these days Islington is very much part of central London. Until not that long ago, Islington was a village in the countryside, up a hill from the City of London, what we now call the Square Mile, the walled city, medieval city. And between the Islington and the city, there were woods where there would be robbers and bandits. So that road was not one that you would want to go on at night. So if you were coming from the north of England or the east, you might well spend the last night before you went to London here in Islington, staying at an inn, changing your horses. Maybe if you were bringing livestock to be sold at the markets in London, you might have a rest here for them to fatten up. So Islington became very important as the last stop before you got to the city. So we're going to set off on the walk very shortly. It'll last it's about an hour and a half if you were walking it yourself. It could be even longer if you find things of interest along the way that you want to spend more time looking at. First of all, we'll be going down a slight hill to get to the canal, but after that it's more or less on the flat all the way. There are a few little ramps up to bridges, because occasionally we're going to go across and see something that's just on the other side of the canal. But generally it's pretty flat. You may come across joggers and cyclists, so do be careful as you are going along. Be aware of your surroundings. Before we go and see one watercourse, I want to talk about one that you can't actually see at the moment, but we would actually be standing next to if we were here less than 200 years ago. Because here is something that's called the New River. Now, it's not a river, and it's certainly not new, because it was created over 400 years ago. And it's in fact what we would call an aqueduct. In 1600, an entrepreneur called Edmund Colthurst had the great idea of getting water, fresh water, and selling it to the City of London. So he went to the King, who was James I of England at the time, and got her permission to build this aqueduct. At his own expense, he started digging it, but unfortunately, the history keeps repeating itself. He ran out of money. So the project was taken away from him and given to the Corporation of the City of London, which is the local authority, which even to this day is responsible for the City of London, what we might call the Square Mile. And they gave the project to one Hugh Middleton. And he then proceeded to dig this aqueduct. Hugh Middleton started the project, recommenced the project, and in 1611 he ran into the same problems. He ran out of money. So he went to the King, James I, and asked for some finance, and the King said, yes, I'll give you half the money, but on two conditions. One is that I have half the profits from the project, and also that you dig this river going to go through my grounds of my palace in Theodore Park, which is out in Hertfordshire. So the canal, the new river, was created, and it was completed in 1613, and it's 39 miles long. It cost in today's money £50 million, which probably isn't all that a large sum of money considering the work that had to be done. And it supplied water to the City of London. Over the years, over the centuries, the demand for water increased, and they had to then divert water from the River Lee, which was running alongside it, and then later they dug great shafts to get down to wells to get water out to supplement the water supply. But that water supply is still being provided to London. It still provides an eighth of London's daily water requirements. So that's 48 million gallons of water a day, 220 megalitres. As you can see, there is no river here. That's because at the end of the 1800s, it was filled in here because it was getting far too full of rubbish, polluted. But the end of the network is currently at Clissold Park in Stoke Newington, which is to the northeast of here. So we can, as Londoners, can be really thankful to the people of the Stuart period for this wonderful water supply that was dug at that time, the not so new river.
This is the Islington Tunnel. It's 3/4 of a mile long, and it took 3 years to build. Then what they had to do was to drill down through the land in Islington, make shafts, and then dig out from the shafts to either end to make the tunnel. But not only did they have to actually dig under Islington, they also had to go underneath that new river that we've just been talking about. So they had to make sure that they didn't empty all of the new river water into the canal. So the canal had boats which didn't have engines in the early 1800s. They were drawn by horses along the towpath. But when they came to a tunnel like this, the horses had to go over the top. So how did the boats get through? Well, they had to have young men, boys, had to lie on the top of the barges, the boats, and put their feet against the edges of the tunnel and basically move the boat through using their legs. It's called legging it. Well, this was a very busy canal, and this caused major bottlenecks. So shortly after the canal was completed in 1820, they actually brought in steam tugs, because by then steam engines had been developed rather more. And so these steam tugs could pull 4 barges at a time through and clear the bottlenecks. And these steam tugs actually were in operation right up until the 1930s, by which time most of the boats would have had their own engines. So a major engineering feat from 200 years ago. Right, so why do we have canals? Got rivers? Why do we need canals? Well, it was all to do with the Industrial Revolution and transporting goods and exporting goods. The manufacturing base, to a great extent, was in the Midlands, around the Birmingham area. But they needed to get their goods either to the major cities like London or else get down to a seaport so they could export it abroad. In those days, the roads were so bad that it was just inconvenient, slow. Can you imagine trying to transport Wedgwood, pottery, along the bumpy roads down to London? So water was a much safer, more secure way of bringing goods to market. So a whole network of canals were built throughout the country, most of them coming from Birmingham outwards. But this canal was one of the last to be built. The first canal that was built was in 1761 in Bridgewater. This one, the Regent's Canal, was completed in 1820. It linked up with the Grand Union Canal, which came down from Birmingham and which comes into London at the Paddington Basin, so Little Venice to the west of here. The canal was built in 2 stages, partly because there wasn't enough money. The first one was from Paddington to Camden Town, and then this stretch from Camden Town to Limehouse Basin, which is where the canal meets the River Thames and finds the seagoing ships. So this part was completed in 1820. Had many problems. One of the promoters ran off with the money. They installed the wrong type of locks and had to start again. They didn't have enough water, they had to divert water from another river. But eventually, and they also had the problem with the general cost. But war came to their rescue because the Napoleonic Wars ended in 1815, and as a result of the end of the war, there were lots of people who were unemployed. So the government basically created a job creation scheme to subsidise the manufacturing poor. And so the canal company was able to use cheap labour to build the canal. Why is it called the Regent's Canal? Well, it's all to do with the Prince Regent, the heir to the throne at the time. John Nash, architect, was one of the directors of the company, and he was a great friend of the Prince Regent, and so he persuaded the Prince to allow him to use his name for this canal. But canals were almost, as soon as they were built, they were almost out of date, and this one, was being the last one, soon had tense competition from the railways. The London to Birmingham Railway was completed in 1837, so only 17 years after this canal was completed. And of course, a railway was faster to bring your goods to the city. So almost as soon as they were completed, they started to go into decline. They were still in use up until the Second World War. They were used quite a lot during World War II. After the Second World War, they were nationalised as part of the Labour government's nationalisation plan, and went into steep decline after that. But the main thing that was the final nail in the coffin for the canals was the very, very cold winter of 1962 to 63, when boats on the canal were actually frozen in for 3 months. They couldn't move for 3 months, so nobody wanted to send their goods on using that form of transport when they could be stuck for 3 months in the ice. So commercial traffic more or less finished after that. Some of the canals were dug up and covered and filled in, but thanks to some volunteers and people who were really enthusiastic about canals, they were then transformed into places for recreation. And what we see today, the boats that we see today, are not commercial boats, but recreational boats and people who live on boats. So it's a wonderful place to live, to go messing about in a boat, the canals, and we'll see lots of people just doing that as we go along. And just a few tips for walking along this canal path. It may get quite crowded, so don't worry about keeping right or left. Just wind your way along, but try not to walk two abreast because the path is really quite narrow. There'll be people coming up behind you. They might even be on bikes, they may be running, so just be aware all the time and just be considerate to people. Don't assume that you've got a right of way all the time. So we're now at what's called the City Road Basin, and at the time when this was a working commercial canal, this is what the second most important place on the canal in central London for unloading and loading cargo. So you can imagine back then it would have been surrounded by warehouses, lots of boats coming and going, bringing in ice. It was very important for the supply of ice, bringing it from Canada, the Arctic. So lots of commercial activity here, and look at it now, how very different. And in fact, if you'd been here 20 years ago, it would have been very different. It would have been actually, wouldn't have been accessible to the public. There would have been derelict warehouses here. And then in 2004, there was a regeneration project started. And look what we've got now. We've got apartments, we've got cafes, we've got people on sailing boats in the summer. You can maybe see some sailing boats moored up in the middle of the basin. And it was made accessible to the public in 2009. So this is the City Road Basin, a very desirable place to live now. Not so 20 years ago. I remember it well. Called it the City Road Basin. A basin is basically an area where the boats would come and moor up. They might moor up for overnight permanently or even permanently, but also it was a place where you could unload and load cargo, particularly important here on the City Road. We're now in front of what's called the Packington Estate, so those flats that you can see in front of you with the balconies. And this is actually a really interesting housing experiment, and I think it's possibly unique, and I suspect it will never be repeated. If we come back to the end of the Second World War, what we would have had here was what had originally been genteel Victorian houses, large houses, houses in the Victorian period you'd have had servants, but by the end of the Second World War it was basically a slum area. The houses had been divided up and 2, 3, maybe even 4 families would be living in each house. So the proposal was, after the Second World War, that it would all be transferred to a property developer, and they were proposing to knock it all down. And there was such an outcry because they thought that it was going to be, what would happen to the people who lived there, the poor people? They thought they'd just be driven out and have nowhere to live. So there was a great outcry, and eventually the estate was actually purchased by Islington Council. So it became council property. And they knocked down the houses that were there. There was a lot of controversy about that. People thought they should have just refurbished them, but they knocked them down and built what we would think these days of as 1960s concrete blocks, 5, 6 stories high of flats. But to be honest, at the time, they were considered to be luxury. They had far better accommodation than the houses that they replaced, and they had quite a lot of facilities that ordinary flats just didn't have. But over the next few decades, it became apparent that the construction had been done on a pretty cost-cutting basis. There were construction problems, and they properties were beginning to, well, not exactly fall apart, but they were in a bad state of repair. So in the early 2000s, the properties were, like many other council properties, were transferred to housing associations. And the Hyde group that took them over had this revolutionary idea of basically knocking them down and replacing them with a mixture of types of tenure. So you'd have privately owned property and council property all together, and so you couldn't tell which was which. And the way they financed it was that they replaced 500 odd flats with 400 odd flats which were going to be rented at sub-market rates. And to subsidise this, they would then sell off 300 houses and flats to the private sector, which would then subsidise the rents of the others. So that's what we have now. It took a number of years to knock all of them down and rebuild them. But I think, as we will see shortly, I think it's actually a very nice development. It's got a lot of open space, and as I said, you just can't tell which are the private and which are the rental properties there. So we'll just go and have a quick look as we walk past. And the people in the rental property are very lucky. Just look at them. They've got balconies over the canal, which would cost an absolute fortune, which is why I say I don't think it would ever happen again, to be building sub-market rate rental properties in this location. No, we just came through the gates and you saw the name, Gainsborough Studios. But in fact, where we are standing at the moment, originally it used to be called Islington Studios. And in fact, even before that, there was a power station here. So if we go back to the early 1900s, in 1919, the old power station here was taken over by a film company and converted into what at that time were in fact the most high-tech state-of-the-art film studios in the UK, and they were called Islington Studios. So they opened in 1920, and in fact, in that very year, a young man who was from Leytonstone, so that's just a bit further east of here, came knocking on the door. He had designed title cards for the first film that this company was producing. So I remember that back at that time, we didn't have talking pictures, they were all silent pictures. So the title cards are what explained the action and the dialogue. This person had actually designed them for the first film that they were producing. They told him, no, we're doing another one instead. So he went away, persistent came back with some more title cards, and they took him on as a part-time title card designer. And that person was Alfred Hitchcock. And that's who you can see in front of you, the sculpture behind it. That's the head of Alfred Hitchcock, who became an incredibly famous film director. But he started here as a title card designer. He was taken on very quickly on a full-time basis and gradually worked his way up through the ranks to become a director, and directed one of his first films here, The Lady Vanishes, before he was taken away by Hollywood and became a great Hollywood director. But as I said, the studio was originally a power station. It was converted into studios, but like many other film studios, it had a great fire risk. In fact, in the 1930s, there was a major fire here and most of it was destroyed. But if you think back in those days, you had film, which was highly flammable, the strong lights that were flammable, electricity cables, which maybe not been up to our standards today, and for soundproofing, they used to put blankets around the walls of the studio to try and muffle the sound. So everything was combined to be a fire risk, and in fact some studios actually had their own fire brigades. But anyway, it was a factory for films. It was almost like a sweatshop. They produced a film in 18 days. They were mainly B movies in the days when you used to go to the cinema and you used to have a major film and then you had a secondary film, the B movie. B movies, melodramas, that's what were produced here. During the Second World War, it closed down because it still had the chimney from the power station here, and the authorities thought that if there was a bomb dropped nearby, the chimney could fall down onto the studio and kill people. It opened again for a short while after the Second World War. At that point it was then called Gainsborough Studios. It was owned by Rank, and it continued to produce films for a few years. Again, melodramas, some which were a bit risque for the time, The Wicked Lady and Funny by Gaslight. And then in 1949 it was closed down, and the studio moved to another of the Rank locations. It was continued to be used for television post-production up until the early 2000s, when it was not closed down, and these flats were built in its place. They still commemorate one of their greatest legends from the studios, Alfred Hitchcock, by this amazing statue in front of you. Well, we've come back across the canal and turned right, and we're now going to go back down to join the canal. Look for this sign here, Baring Street, and we're going to go back down the steps to join the canal. We've come up just up from the canal, and we're now standing in front of the Rosemary branch, which currently is a pub. And we have records that show that in fact there was an inn here even way back at the end of the 1500s, when archers who were practicing their archery skills at Shoreditch would come here afterwards to have a pint of ale or something similar. And it must have been a pub or an inn for all the intervening period. But the next time we want to talk about it is in 1847. There is a sketch of this pub, its predecessor pub, and it had enormous grounds behind it. And the picture shows that the pub and its grounds were more or less a pleasure garden. So there are like grandstands with people in them, there's horses racing, there's a race course around the back garden, so to speak. There's a woman on a tightrope going across the garden. There are people going up in hot air balloons. So it was obviously the place to come to have a bit of fun in the early 1800s. And then there was a fire in the middle of the 1800s and the pub was destroyed, and this one was built. And instead of having the pleasure gardens reinstated, they actually went for what was on the trend at the time, which was music halls. So they had a music hall attached to the pub. And we come to another entertainment legend here, because one Mary Lloyd had her first break here. When she was a teenager, she wrote about it later, that she had had a bad gig, so to speak, at another inn nearby, and she was given a bad review, and then the owner of the Rosemary branch booked her for a one-night slot, and he liked her so much that he booked her for the whole week, and she was absolutely ecstatic. She said, I earned this colonial salary of 30 shillings, so that's just over 10p for the night. And she said, I am at the height of my fame and fortune, which of course she wasn't, because she went on to become an absolute superstar in the music hall industry, and an actress and just a comedian who was well known for her rather risque songs. But the music hall license did not last long, because the music hall were being overtaken by variety performances, so they went out of fashion. So there was only a music hall here until the 1880s. But strangely enough, this pub now has a theatre, sort of fringe theatre attached to it, and it has a rehearsal room which is called the Mary Lloyd Room. The theatre has 55 seats, and it is one of the few fringe theatres in London that has a royal box. There's two seats which are separated off for the royals if they ever wish to come. I don't know if they ever have, probably not, but it's a place that still puts on entertainment after all these years. Here we are at another one of those basins where boats in the commercial period would have been moored, but as you can see there are boats moored here today as well. At the end of the commercial use of the canals, this area fell into real disrepair and it became unused, unloved, and the water just was so silted up that boats couldn't really come in here. So it was only in the 1980s when Hackney Council gave money for the whole regeneration of this area that there was money available to dredge the basin and to allow boats to come back in again, and also for there to be residential moorings of great value in central London. And there's a group called the Canals in Hackney User Group who actually manage all these residential moorings. And if you have a walk around, you'll see that there are allotments, there's floating gardens, there's even a duck coop. So take some time just to have a wander around and see how this basin is now being used. And another use of this basin is water sports. There's actually a water sports club on the other side of the canal. And often if you come here at the weekends, you'll find that there are boys and girls in kayaks and canoes doing slaloms around those posts that you can see in front of you near the bridge. So it really is a hive of activity at the weekend. Right. So in front of you, on the other side of the canal, you'll see a red building with greenery down the side of it. That is actually a school. But before the school was there was the gasworks there, and when they demolished the gasworks, there wasn't very much space to fit in the school, so they had to be very clever with the design of the building. And they wanted to also bring in as much light as possible into the building, and we'll see how they did that when we walk past it. But the building you can see in front of you is actually a performance hall because the school specialises in maths and music. It's a state school. It's supported by the large Swiss bank UBS, but it's for secondary school children. It has not only a performance space, but it has a sports hall which comes down to by the canal in steps, and then the main building has a large atrium with lots of glass and light coming in, and they've cleverly used the design of the main building to have roof spaces which are used as rehearsal spaces as well, so people can be outside when the weather's good performing and practicing their performing arts. So let's go and have a look at it and see how cleverly this building, which won an award in 2009 for the British Civil Building of the Year, see what it looks like and how they managed to fit so much into such a little space. Right, as you will see, the name of the street here is the Broadway Market, and that pretty much describes exactly what goes on here. Broadway Market is one of the oldest outdoor markets in London. It got its charter in 1890. But after the Second World War, when we started getting supermarkets and this area became more run down, the trade for that market declined significantly and it more or less closed down. And in fact, in the 1990s and early 2000s, there was a plan to actually knock this whole area down and redevelop it. But there was a great campaign for keeping the market, and in fact, it relaunched in 2004, quite different from before. It's very much an artisan market. If any of you know Borough Market, there are quite a lot of traders, similar traders from Borough Market. It's held here in the street on a Saturday, so if you're lucky to be doing this on a Saturday, you'll find lots of stalls with artisan products, cheese, wonderful breads, sausages, local foods of all sorts. If you're not here on a Saturday, I would recommend that you come back again because it is absolutely fantastic. And in addition, the shops down the side of the street are actually also wonderful places to visit during the week, with wonderful bakeries, fruit stalls, shops, all sorts of things. So you will not be disappointed even if you're not here on a Saturday. Right, we're just going to go round the corner for one last stop, and then after that you can come back to the market and the shops and shop to your heart's content. We're now standing in London Fields, which is at the north end of Broadway Market. And this was incredibly important in the history of this area. Because London Fields, a bit like when I talked at the beginning about the Angel, how you'd stop over at the Angel before going on to central London. Well, this was the place where people who were bringing their livestock to central London for sale or for slaughter, if they were coming from East Anglia or from the east of England, they would come down to London, they would arrive here. So this was the end of a drover's route. And because after that enormous journey, the livestock needed fattening up, they'd spend time here in the London Fields, fattening up their livestock before going on to, say, Smithfield in the City of London or other meat markets. And also, you'd have farmers' wives bringing their produce here for sale as well at the same time. And we actually have in this park some statues which are fairly modern but made out of cobbles and all sorts of interesting material, which depict those women with their baskets full of fruit and vegetables, and also sheep, to remind us that sheep were one of the main livestock that came through here and would be feeding themselves here in London Fields. And these days it's just a nice open space for everybody to enjoy. So here we are, we're at the end of our tour. Thank you for joining me. For me, it's been a lovely sunny day, and I hope that you have a sunny day when you do this tour as well. And we look forward to meeting you again in person on one of our tours.
How about that then, eh? So hopefully it felt like you were actually with Susan on the Canal side. I have had a question, Susan, from Kerry, who wants to know more about Islington Studios.
All right. Well, that's a very good question, because in fact we're going to hopefully give you a bit more information when we're going to show you some more pictures and slides. So hopefully I might be able to answer some questions. But if you've still got some questions, then do give another shout out, and I'll see if I can help you.
Lovely. All right. So what do you want to kick off with, Susan?
Right. Well, as Hazel said at the beginning, we can't tell you everything during the walk. There's always more to tell you, and we don't normally present pictures because we're trying to tell the story with our words. But what I'd like to do now is show you some more slides, some more pictures, and give you a bit more information about some of the stops that I talked about on that the walk. And so the first one I want to talk about is the new river, the aqueduct, the one that is a river but is not a river and it's not new. And what we have here, hopefully it's in large enough print, is a map showing the route of the new river. And it starts off in the north in Hereford. Sorry, not Hereford, Hertford, to the north of London, and it comes all the way down to Islington. And I talked about how James I insisted that the new river actually went through his park, Theodore's Park. And it's actually, if you can see I think it's where the M25 goes across the new river, and there's the word Waltham Cross. And the Theodore's Park is more or less where the A of Waltham Cross is. And the route is still there. As I said, the river is, in fact, the new river is above ground for most of the way. And there is actually a signpost path. So if you're actually feeling adventurous, you can walk the new river. It's a walk that was developed by Thames Water, who currently own and manage the new river. And they produced a leaflet. And you can find that leaflet on a number of websites, and we will be sending you the link to that website where you can find the leaflet if you want to walk all or part of that new river. I haven't done it yet. It's something I plan to do because it looks a very interesting route. But we're now going to see what the new river actually looks like. because you might think of it, an aqueduct, as being something quite narrow, but this is actually right at the start of the new river. This is Gage House at a place called Newgage, and behind this building is actually the River Lee, and the River Lee is one of the sources of the water that comes down the aqueduct. So water was being taken out of the river, which runs directly behind it, through this gap in the building and into the aqueduct. And this house was built in 1856. It still operates as a means of diverting water from the River Lee. Originally, there would have just been water from springs, but as I'd said on the walk, the water supply wasn't sufficient for London, so they had to take water from the River Lee, and an act of because there was a limit on how much they could have, because they still had to leave enough water in the River Lee to allow navigation. But today, there's taking 22.5 million gallons of water from the river every day. So it's a major source of water for the Greater London. So we're then going to go and look at the Packington estate, which I talked about. So the rather revolutionary housing project. So I want to show you it at various stages. So I talked about how originally it would have been fairly grand houses. Now, this isn't a particularly good photo, but it gives you an idea of what that area would look like, what the houses were before they were knocked down and the 1960s blocks of flats were built. So this is what you would have seen. And then we go to what they built in the 1960s. So you can see pretty grey concrete, but they've got balconies, which must have been quite revolutionary for the time, because most flats wouldn't have had balconies then. And then we're going to then see exactly the same spot shot of now. So you can see how it's changed. Much brighter, more attractive buildings and more up to date. Lots of attractive open space. And here we are looking at the canal side of the current estate. So the desirable properties overlooking the canal. So really a revolutionary housing development, and fits in very well with the other redevelopments of blocks of flats along the canal. So lucky people who've got those flats overlooking the canal. Now, the next thing is, the person who asked about talking about Islington Studios and Gainsborough Studios. So this here, as you can see, is Gainsborough Studios. It must have been after the Second World War, because it's changed its name. But you can still see that tower from the original power station. So this is probably the 1940s, this picture showing you what the studios, when they were still being used for producing films. But now I want to talk to you a bit about some of the films that were produced here. So here we have one going right back to the days of the silent films, one called The Lodger. And this was the third film that Alfred Hitchcock directed. And it's about foggy London. In fact, this film is featured in one of the podcasts, which is on the London Guided Works website. So you might want to listen to that, about how films have taken the London fog as a theme. But this film also made reference really back to Jack the Ripper, because it's all about a young man who goes and lodges with this lady at a time when there's a serial killer on the loose in London. And his landlady suspects that he is the serial killer. I'm not going to tell you what the outcome of the film is. It's still available to be seen, but it features. It's important because it's not only one of Alfred Hitchcock's first films, but it actually features a real superstar of the time, Ivor Novello. Now, Ivor Novello is possibly better known for The Rewards, that have been set up in his name, which are sort of really prestigious awards for UK songwriters and composers. So you get an Ivor, like in the same way you might get an Oscar for acting. But back in the 20s, he was not only famous for being a songwriter, but also for being an actor. He was a real superstar of the time. So this is one of the films that he featured in from the films that were produced at the Islington studios, as they were at the time. And in fact, there were a number of films that he appeared in that were made there. Still talking about Alfred Hitchcock, we then get The Lady Vanishes. And this is a film that you might see quite often, even on television these days. I really love this film. It's sort of, although we might say the production values are somewhat very old-fashioned, but it's really exciting. It's all just before the Second World War. There's spies, intrigue, kidnapping, and it features Michael Redgrave and Margaret Lockwood. And it was this film that probably resulted in Alfred Hitchcock going to Hollywood, because the Americans saw this film and were very impressed with it. And so he was sort of whisked away to Hollywood to start his directing career there. And that was obviously a talkie, whereas the Lodger was a silent film. Now, after the Second World War, we find Margaret Lockwood again, but this in a film called The Wicked Lady, featuring James Mason, probably just before he again also went off to Hollywood to start his career there. Now, it was when I mentioned about being a really risque film at the time. And in fact, the Americans insisted that it had to be reshot, and lots of the films to be reshot, because the costumes were, the women's dresses were considered to be far too low cut. But this film had a risque, not only the dresses, but just the whole story. It's about a nobleman's wife who becomes a highwaywoman for excitement, and she has an affair with another highwayman who's James Mason. And there's lots of infidelity and betrayal and murder and scheming. And in fact, it had the biggest British box office of the year when it was released, 1946. And to say it was released in the same year as Brief Encounter. So it had stiff competition, but it was the public absolutely loved it. And I must admit, it really is a great film. So another film from Margaret Lockwood, who was a favourite of the Islington and Gainsborough studios. So there we go. Certainly a place for the film industry, its history in the British, for the UK film industry. But now we're going on now to another sort of place of entertainment. And this is in the walk. I mentioned about there being a sketch of what the Rosemary Branch Tea Garden looked like before it was burnt down and rebuilt with a music hall. So this shows you in probably the 1840s, people coming for the day. You can see the galleries around here. There's the lady on the tightrope going from a tree down to the stadium. There are ponies or horses racing around the edge. There's somebody on a tightrope in the middle. And in the distance, you can see, on the right-hand side, you can see hot air balloons. So very much in favour at that time, sort of a source of excitement. So it was a place you could go, and it must have been reasonably elegant, respectable, because there's a couple there who've got a child. So it wasn't a sort of risque place at the time. So good, clean entertainment in the early Victorian period, the Rosemary Branch. But then it changed music hall. We then get Marie Lloyd, the queen of the music hall, who got her break at the Rosemary Branch. She was from the local area, actually, and her father sort of set her off singing around pubs at a very early age. And her professional debut was at the age of about 14. She was born in Hoxton, which is just down the road from Islington, in 1870. She was Matilda Alice Victoria Wood, but changed her name to Marie Lloyd. from the age of 14, but even by 16, she was very popular. By the time she was 16, she was earning £100 a week, which in today's money is about £13,000, which is an awful lot of money for the time. But by the middle of the 1890s, she was getting in trouble with the theatre censors because they thought that her songs were too risque. She sang things like "My Old Man Said Follow the Van" and "Oh, Mr. Porter, What Should I Do?", which was about a young woman who got on the wrong train trying to get back to Birmingham, and then she sought assistance, so to speak, from an elderly man in the carriage and ended up going off to marry him. The upper classes actually liked her sauciness. They thought it was great. But the working classes from which she came actually were rather disapproving of the lyrics of her song and the way she behaved. But she had success not only in the UK, but she did tours of the United States and continental Europe and was a great success. So she had a long career, and despite her trouble with the innuendos in her song, she managed to survive throughout the Victorian and the Edwardian period. So that's Mary Lloyd, looking a bit with a low-cut dress there.
Susan, we've had a question from Gordon about Kingsland Basin, and I know you moved on there next. And the question was Kingsland Basin, was it the one that was cleared and now has residential moorings?
That's absolutely right. Yes, it is. And here's a picture of it. It's Kingsland Basin. Yes, it's the moorings are all managed by the actual residents, which is very unusual. So yeah, if you go in there, you'll see this is a picture of one of the boats. They sort of have floating pontoons next to the boats as their garden. So yeah, this is very much a residential mooring in the Kingsland Basin. So that's absolutely right. That's what you'll find in the basin. So that just gives you an idea of what you might see. Now, I spoke about, I think we walked, I didn't speak about, sorry, as on the tour, we walked past some street art. And if you were actually doing the tour with the app, you would be able to stand and look at it. But this is showing you what you would have seen on the other side of the canal. This is a piece of street art called "By the Canal," and it's by a French artist who lives in London now, called Zabou. It was painted in 2019. And if you want to see some more of her work, you look on her Instagram page. She specialises normally specialises in giant portraits, but that was a young man tying up a canal boat. And another one that she's done, I haven't seen this myself, so I'm looking out for it, is on the side of this narrowboat. And it shows you a diver, a snorkeler, who's rather surprised to find a fish. He's holding up a perch. And then at the other end of the boat, on the left-hand side, there's a pike, which is chasing a rudd, another type of fish. So this is sort of showing the underwater life on the canal. And this boat, as I understand, is travels near and across London. So if you're going along the canals in London, you might be lucky to see it. So keep an eye open for that other piece of artwork called All Aboard by Zabou.
We've had another question come in, Susan. What was the name of that brilliantly designed secondary school?
Now, my brain has gone, so just a second. It's some academy. Sorry, just a second. Let me just get myself sorted.
One thing we didn't mention on the video, everyone, is that when you look at it, I saw it from the pictures and the video I took, and that it's actually in the shape of a ship, which on a boat right next to the canal. So I like how they've tied that in, and then that allows them to have that extra external rehearsal space that they need. Sorry.
There's lots. I mean, there's lots. I think some of the photos did sort of show it, but they've actually got lots of flat balconies as they go up the ship. Like on the decks as you go up, and that's their outdoor rehearsal place. And it's actually called the Bridge Academy. Sorry, my mind went slipped from my mind. It's called the Bridge Academy.
Yeah.
And it won an award. So it's quite amazing how much they managed to sort of fit into that space, and they're very clever because it's a north-facing building, and so there's lots of glass to get there's a big atrium, and so getting lots of light coming down into the building to compensate for it being a north-facing building.
Yeah. Now, just want to make sure that nobody else has got any questions. You're all a little bit quiet tonight, and I am aware of the time we've hit 8 o'clock. So please do send us your last questions if you have any. Saying that though, Susan, thank you very much for that tour tonight. I do like that combo of pre-filmed and then also live add-ons. What we're going to do for everybody who has attended tonight, we are going to give you free access to our brand new self-guided tour, which is there's no app, it's all done by Safari, it's browser based, and so you can actually physically do the tour in your own time, and we give you little bullet points, and as you walk along, when you get to the a particular stop, the information will appear magically on your screen, I promise, and so with Susan on it, and also some bullet points and extra stuff there. So if you are desperate, like I suppose many of us are, to get out and do something as a little thank you for coming on our virtual tour tonight, we are giving you that access absolutely free, and that will be in the email I send after the event. And also, I'll just write in my little homework, Susan, we're going to do the link to the New River Walk as well, and I'll do a link to the London podcast about London fog as well, because that's a really big theme. So we have Trevor, who has it's Trevor and Drain, isn't it? Really interesting, Hazel and Susan. Thank you. You are very welcome.
Thank you.
Whet the appetite to do this tour in person when we are allowed. Well, you're allowed to do it in your, if we give you that the access to the app, Trevor. So you could do that. Maybe it'd be nice to eat. As Susan says, it's a really great walk on a Saturday because the food markets in London are still open. So you know, mask on and you can still do that. Next question is, do you do a tour of the St. John's Wood end of the canal? And the answer is not yet.
Yes.
We are working on another canal project at the moment, aren't we, Susan? We can't
indeed.
that at the moment. It's all super secret, hush hush. But yes, we'll do in the end. Trevor, I used to live in West Hampstead, so I used to walk from basically Little Venice all the way down to Angel. And I actually met my husband when I did an industrial canal walk from Camden town to Angel. So I've done that stretch as a tour. And yes, and who knew several years later we'd be wed. So you never know what happens on the canal. Indeed. We'll keep you up to date with all our new projects, but I really hope you enjoyed it, and I do apologise once again for the technical issue at the very beginning. It was my fault for not publishing that link in time, so blame me, no one else. So thank you for that. So is there anything else you want to add, Susan? And I'll just double check that we've got no very last questions.
No, I just think I just think it's a fascinating part of the canal. I used to work right near the City Road Basin, and up until how many years ago, about 15 years ago, and I just remember what it used to be like, and I'm just astounded at how the canal has changed over these years. It's just absolutely unbelievable what's happened along that stretch, and so I think. It may not be what people think is the glamorous bit, but I think it's certainly becoming very trendy, and they've done an amazing job.
I think they have as well. Yeah. Andy and Lisa have said, "Oh, we'd love a Little Venice, Paddington Basin, St. John's Wood guided walk." There you go, Susan. That'll give you something to do. We've had thank you for the tour, Susan and Hazel. Richard from Paddington's Estate. Richard,
right.
need to send us some inside photos, please. We're very open for coming for a cup of tea when we're allowed as well. That would be lovely. And so we've got the Paddington. What else we got? Channel 5 have a programme on Wednesday at 7:00 called Building Britain's Canals, and it's the Grand Union this week. Oh, fantastic. So that'll be certainly one to watch. Now, I'm from Staffordshire, and if I talk in a normal Brummie accent like this, you might be able to tell. And one of the things that we're very proud of in Birmingham is that Birmingham has more canals than in Venice. So there is so much history that we are just not shouting about. Lisa, thank you so much. Very informative again. We're loving these. We thank you so much for everybody who keeps coming back time and time again. It really gives us a sense of purpose, especially when we're really limited. And of course, I miss you all so much. And a lot of these names I'm seeing booking, and I'm going, oh. So the next tour is in 2 weeks, but on a Monday night, and that is my live street art tour. We're doing it a little bit differently again. I've gone out and I have filmed, but because it was just me, I have filmed the streets. So we've got the video, and I'm going to do a live commentary over that video. And I even managed to catch the megastar cartographer Ben Ein in action. So I was very excited on that day as well. So just realised that my face is now white because it's got so dark down here. There we go. Yeah. So, any other questions or comments? We will keep you up to date with all the new stuff. Here we go. Well interpreted. Thanks for a great show. Now, you are very welcome, Gordon. Thank you for joining us tonight. Thank you, Susan. Big round of applause for you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Hazel, for organising all the technical side of it.
Yeah, well, there's always got to be some little hitch, and I'm glad it's my fault. So
no, I wasn't meaning that. I was meaning doing all the filming and everything, the editing of everything. You did it all. One woman.
Well, I've got plenty of strings to my bow, haven't I? So no, I hope you've all enjoyed it by your comments that you have. I'm glad that you have. Have a fantastic rest of your Sunday, and hopefully I will see you in 2 weeks on Monday, the 29th of April, 7:00 again for our street art tour. Thanks very much now, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.